Hello and welcome back to the channel. So we are doing a quick video today, and if you just started to crochet or you want to know more about crochet/knitting and the materials you need, then stay tuned. If you're new here, hi, I'm Carla. I make crochet/making content as well as life abroad vlogs and video essays, which you can watch here. So if you are interested in any of that, please do subscribe, and I'm glad that you clicked on this video, and let's get started. So when you first start crocheting, there can be a lot of barriers to entry, more than you would necessarily think of. And while a lot of them are kind of obvious, like, okay, your first project should be easy, it should be from probably a free pattern, it should probably include a video tutorial to just make things easier for you. I feel like when you are just starting to crochet or knit, that no one really talks about materials. And it makes sense because it's a bit more of like a nerdier, maybe more expensive thing to even take into consideration, but it can make or break some projects. When I first started crocheting, my first ever project was a beanie, like the classic kind that you just crochet a rectangle, seam it together, and seam the top together and then fold the brim. And that I used acrylic yarn. I just used the cheapest yarn I could find, and while I think acrylic yarn is totally fine for that specific project, if I had tried to make something else, like a simple tote bag with acrylic yarn, I don't think I would have been as happy with the result. So I want to do a super quick overview of yarn. So welcome to your complete sort of mini guide to yarn types, and specifically materials. I'm not going to talk a lot about yarn weights, which is basically the thickness of your yarn. So let's start off with everyone's favorite beginner-friendly yarn, which is acrylic yarn. So this is a synthetic material, and it is extremely affordable, but just like many things that are extremely affordable, they come at a cost to both the planet and to the outcome of your project. Acrylic yarn is actually quite stretchy once crocheted, so it's not necessarily good for something like a tote bag, for example, because you're just going to weigh down that bag with all of the stuff that you put inside of it. Of course, you can add a lining and things like that, but that's more advanced. We're talking about beginner level, which materials you should consider and for when. And while I could sit here and tell you how acrylic yarn is very bad for the environment and how it's not that nice and it doesn't feel nice and it's not breathable, which I have talked about before, I'm not going to pretend like it's not extremely convenient and that I don't understand why people use it. I think acrylic yarn is a good option if you're just starting out, if you're not sure how much you want to commit to this craft, and also for certain things that you will actually use/wear. So I think acrylic yarn can be really good for home goods, let's say like a throw pillowcase or a blanket or some sort of decor for your house, as well as amigurumi, making little like soft plushy toys for like a kid or just for fun. The reason why is because they're cheap, and it doesn't really matter what those things necessarily feel like as long as they look how you want them to look, in my opinion. I do not recommend acrylic yarn at all for garments. I do have one sweater that is acrylic yarn, which I kind of regret. But if you are going to make stuff that you want to wear out of acrylic, I highly recommend that you don't make socks. And if you're going to make some sort of top, I recommend that you use a blend of acrylic and a natural material, because acrylic isn't breathable and it will get stinky. However, I do think it's a perfectly fine idea to use acrylic yarn for something like gloves or mittens, hats, scarves. Because it's not breathable, it is really warm and hot. So while that sounds nice for a sweater, you're not going to feel very good in it. You might feel itchy, you might feel sweaty, you might feel damp because there's no like air going through. But when that comes to something that's covering your hands or just your neck or just the top of your head, it's usually fine. If anything, I've been working on my sister's scarf for Christmas, and that's with acrylic yarn, and it's a big project, so I'm glad I'm using acrylic because it's much more affordable, and also I can wrap it around myself now finally while I'm crocheting, and it genuinely keeps me so warm in my flat, and I can feel like the warmth on my neck, and same with my mittens that are crochet acrylic. They're so warm. Next, let's talk about cotton yarn. Cotton yarn is not warm. It is very breathable, but the one issue with it is that there is no drape. So if you make a 100% cotton knitted or crocheted garment, it's going to be very, very stiff and blocky looking, which, as you might know if you watch this video, I don't love. It's also good for stuff like amigurumi and plush toys and decor, and you can put direct heat on it, whereas acrylic yarn you can't because it's basically plastic and it'll melt. You can also find yarn brands that make cotton yarn out of fair trade materials and find more ethical and sustainable companies that create this yarn. My recommendation to get around the drape problem is to use a blend of cotton and something else to add more drape and more movement to your garment. So for example, I have like a cotton bamboo, which I'll talk about bamboo a little bit later, but a cotton bamboo blend top, which fits me perfectly and isn't so stiff and blocky. Overall, cotton is great for summer. I don't recommend it for something like a scarf because it's just going to be really stiff and it's not going to keep you very warm unless your summer is like in Arizona. Then yeah, that would be useful if you want to wear a scarf. Next, we're going to talk about wool. There are tons of different types of wool. There's merino, there's cashmere, there's mohair. There are wool blends where it's a bit of wool, a bit of acrylic, or a bit of merino and a bit of mohair. And I think when people think of wool, they think of winter garments, which is completely valid. And especially if you're willing to spend a bit extra cash, then I do highly recommend using wool for pretty much anything. I wouldn't use wool for any sort of decor, anything for the kitchen, for a plush toy, simply because I think it's a little bit too expensive to use for those specific projects. But using a really nice wool for something you're going to wear or that you're going to give to someone else to wear is really, really, really stunning. Something that people don't realize though is that wool, because it is a natural fiber, it is very breathable and you can actually use your nice, beautiful wool yarns for summer clothing. Of course, I don't recommend using like a super high weight, thick wool yarn for a summery top or dress, but you can use something really fine like mohair or just a super, super fine wool blend and make a really beautiful top or dress or whatever it is that you can wear across all seasons. Of course, using a wool blend where there's some acrylic, some wool, or some mohair, whatever it is, will be a lot cheaper. Also, wool, unlike cotton, even though they're both natural materials, wool is a lot stretchier and has more drape, whereas cotton is just very, very, very stiff. And when I say stretchy, I don't mean that like you take the piece of yarn and it's like elastic. I just mean when it's woven together in stitches, there's like movement and stretch, whereas with cotton it's just going to be like And finally, we'll talk about bamboo. I love bamboo yarn. I've only used it once. It is so, so, so soft, and depending on how bamboo yarn is spun, it can actually be softer than silk, or at least that's what I've read. It has a bit of like a sheen to it that's not synthetic looking. It looks completely natural because it is, and it is just genuinely really, really, really beautiful. However, it is very expensive, which is why I've only worked with it once. So if you're going to use bamboo in a project, I would recommend maybe also putting in some cotton yarn in there, and then you'll kind of lower your costs. Similarly to wool yarn, bamboo can actually trap heat and keep you warm, as well as letting you breathe and keep you cool in warmer weather, making it another great option and much, much, much more versatile than acrylic yarn. Something to note about bamboo is that because it is so like soft and smooth, it can actually be really difficult to work with, depending on how it's spun. But at least the one I use, which I'll put here if I can find it, was almost like not twisted, kind of flat. So my hook would oftentimes like go through the strand of yarn itself and like separate it, which, you know, happens here and there with just crocheting and knitting in general. But with this, it was really easy because it was just so soft and shiny. If I had unlimited resources, I would definitely be making all of my clothing out of bamboo and wool and any home goods out of cotton. But once in a while, I completely understand, because I do it too, why sometimes we use acrylic yarn. But I hope this video helps a lot. I know I could have used it when I first started crocheting because, like I said, I think there are tons of tips out there for beginner crocheters or knitters, but I think material is not something that people really talk about until they get more into the craft, because that's when you start to learn these things just from doing. So I hope this mini guideline helped you so that you can make informed choices for your next project, or maybe your first project. I think that's it for this video. Let me know what you think of these different yarn types and materials in the comments below and what your thoughts are. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you for being here. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of this. And yeah, I hope to see you next time. Bye!